Welcome to another session. I hope you were well. I have titled today's session Where They Should Be. Where They Should Be. And you would have to wait until the end of today's session to understand the core essence of what I'm trying to share. But let me start off by, summarizing where we stopped in the previous session. In the previous session, which I titled Call a Spade by Its Name, I made reference to the fact that this whole new phenomenon we call OnlyFans, especially with regards to women, has come at a powerful pace, speed. The genie is out of the bottle, and therefore it is here to stay. There's nothing we can do about it. As a society, we have turned a blind eye, and I make it very clear as a distinction that there are those producing content on OnlyFans that are non-sexual. My reference, my commentary, my critique, my observation is specifically targeted towards those who produce sexualized content. Now, in the session I covered previously, I made it very clear that the elephant in the room has not been named. And for too long, for too many years, we have sat back and we have encouraged the growth of a behavior that I think is appalling and that I think doesn't really help society and doesn't help the participants involved, both male and female. If you are on OnlyFans and you're producing sexual content of whatever description, you are a prostitute. That is the classical definition. You're producing illicit, explicit, non-explicit sexual content, or producing illicit, explicit sexual acts in exchange for money. That's what we call prostitutes. The colloquial word would be you're a whore. Now, understand that for the past, say, 40 years, we have tried as possible in the West to remove shame from our vocabulary. There was a time when shame kept our social mores or sexual mores in check. People were afraid to be shamed. And so what we've done of late is we've substituted words that evoked what will be considered to be behaviors that society frowned upon. We've replaced such words with softer words to make it more acceptable, socially acceptable. So these days you would see people who are producing sexual content online refer to themselves as entrepreneurs, OnlyFans models, or content creators. These are pseudonyms, these are euphemisms for the word prostitutes, which is what it should be called. Now, if you do not like the word prostitute, and if you do not agree to my definition, then this is my definition. You don't have to accept mine. But if you refuse to accept the reality, which is that in defining what prostitution is, there are two parties. One is the giver and one is the receiver. The one who pays defines implicitly the act being provided. So, for example, despite women say, well, I'm not sleeping with anyone, which was the classical definition of prostitution, engaging in sexual acts in exchange for money, despite women saying, well, this is within the confines of my home or my studio, I do not get to meet the people who are paying or who are subscribing to my content, and therefore it's just entertainment. Despite that position, on the other side, there are men on the other side, and I can guarantee you this: each of those men is not paying you for your entertainment. They are specifically paying for a sexual act, not a sexual act carried out on them, but for a sexual act carried out for them. These men can get off in whatever fashion they want to without being in a position to be physically active with you. So, for example, women who have sex on OnlyFans, some of them with their boyfriends, the women will rationalize their decision on the perspective that we're just having intimacy and having sex, and we allow people to watch us carry out such activities. Well, In the session I covered, I made it very clear that on a hierarchy of positions, legalized prostitutes were the least, in my opinion, were the least abhorrent. You had legalized prostitutes, then you had escorts, then you had porn stars, and then you had OnlyFans content creators of any sort, even if it's just topless or without showing or revealing any part of your body, providing it's a sexualized content. You are producing content in exchange for money. The person receiving that content is achieving the sexual act by themselves, but facilitated by you, the provider. It is prostitution. I don't care how we look at it. It's the same thing as people who are strippers, who say, well, I'm just stripping, I take my clothes off and I dance and people give me money. And therefore, stripping is not something that in a relationship, for example, the woman has a boyfriend, she says, I'm not cheating. That's just absurd, because we all understand that the consumer of the product or the object that has been sexualized by the woman is the man. Now remember this, men are resource objects, women are generally considered to be sexual objects. So when a woman sexualizes herself, she's effectively saying, I am a commodity, I am an object. The consumer of the content or the consumer of the product determines what it is. Now, if you were to ask these men, of course they will not say they're paying for prostitutes, but that's what they are doing. Now, the reason I started today's session with that is simply to reiterate an important statement, which is that the trajectory of those who are producing content on OnlyFans is a predictable one. There is a predictable trajectory to such a path. All it will take is time. In the same way, if you think back to yourself and go back in time, and here's a simple question, an honest question. Can you think of anyone who was considered to be a porn star in the past, a successful porn star in the past, who 20 years from now, you can look back, or you can look at their careers or look at the person and say that they are surviving and thriving and have a happy, fulfilling relationship? The answer is almost no. A name that comes to mind in the UK is Katie Price, someone who has been an attention whore all of her life and would do anything for money, for fame, for power, to be known, for notoriety. A failed individual within the umbrella of what a woman should be, to be very frank. In any case, what you tend to find is the trajectory of most women who follow such a path. It always begins usually subtle, and then it develops because there are needs that are being sustained, and as long as the money comes in, they have to perform to meet those needs of the men on the other side. And in the short term, they get what they want: the money, the notoriety, the fame, the power. But in the long term, what you find is people who do not have any profound, meaningful, significant, fulfilling relationship of any sort. And when they are in a relationship, they are usually with men that they might love, but men that they do not admire, men that they do not respect, men that they do not honor, and men that they do not esteem. And what you find is over the long term, it's just one big mess. You see, money seldom solves the underlying issues that some of these girls have. I would also say, it is my opinion, that without exception, and I have never met one exception, that it is my opinion that most of these women have an underlying issue. Trauma from the past, childhood issues, an absent father, a lack of a loving father, too much love from a father, too strict restrictions by a father and a mother, just things gone wrong in the early stages. A breakdown of a family unit, not having seen love and romance modeled by parents, perhaps jilted at some point in their lives, and therefore have chosen a path that is almost a way of waving their fingers to the heavens to say, look at me now, I'm doing well. OnlyFans, producing content, obtaining attention from men, which is what some women simply want. The attention hit has to keep coming, does not solve the underlying issue. I would say this. My intention in the series, as I mentioned at the start, is not to attack people who produce content. My intention is to provide an idea, a way of thinking, a solution that brings you back to love. And therefore, whilst yesterday's session was more of an opportunity to bring back, I call the elephant in the room by its name, my intention going forward, but also in the series, is to provide things that women should consider should they choose to carry on. There's an important thing I should have stated in the sessions prior. Once you get to about 18 in the West, because you're functionally an adult, you have to choose and think about two paths that are possible solutions, or rather possible choices that you can make. The first is the modern pathway to life, and the second is the traditional pathway to life. One great thing about modern society is that we have developed things, innovation, ideas, solutions that have made life easier for us. But at the same time, in pursuing that, we never thought about unintended consequences. And so we've also done things to destroy ourselves. Now, how is it possible that in the West, we are the wealthiest we've ever been? We have solved the issue about poverty and safety and security, but we're the least happy. You look at women these days, the most educated, the most liberated, the most enrolled in schools, the most employed compared to men, and they are amongst the highest across history with regards to antidepression or taking antidepressants and having suicidal thoughts. You look at young men, we are the most free, the most educated, the West, we're the wealthiest. But here are the statistics for you. This is how powerful the breakdown of the family unit and how much an effect it's had on society. Between 10 and 14, so let me go back. Up until age 10, men, young girls and young boys commit suicide at a similar rate. Between 11 and 14, for young men, it's twice that of girls. Between 15 and 19, it's 4 times. Between 20 and 25, it's 6 times. As you go from 25 and above up until 80, that number jumps to about 16 times. More suicides by boys compared to their similar cohort that are women. You see, not just on the female side, on the male side, we have a crisis taking place. Why? We think the modern approach to doing things and the progressive approach is the right way. So the first thing you have to do is choose whether you want to follow this modern pathway or whether you believe that the things that have worked for generations and that have ensured our survival and are consistent with, you might say, the classical theory of survival, you can choose whether that pathway is the right pathway for you. The great thing about life is we all get to choose. We have a free will, we have the power of choice, we have to choose. And then we have to live with the consequences of the decisions we make. You see, the choices that we make come with constraints. They come with costs. They come with consequences. And therefore, all we are making are simply trade-offs. There are no solutions. So those who were going on OnlyFans and deciding to either sell themselves for a penance or sell themselves for a fortune, you're making a choice. There'll be a cost to that choice. There'll be consequences with those choices, and there'll be constraints. You're making a trade-off. There are no free lunches. The reason being, all it takes is time for your decisions in the present to be manifest over a long period of time. You see, I would also say, as I bring today's session towards the original theme, I would also say that what you see as part of this whole OnlyFans generation is a decade or two of hyper individualism. Everyone is focused on themselves. There is no role for communities and society. So most people who are listening to myself will simply say, well, It's none of your business. Well, in the same breath, the same people will say that they subscribe to the position that Barack Obama said, which is it takes a village to raise a child. Well, if it takes a village to raise a child and it's none of my business, then you don't have what we call an oxymoron. It's cognitive dissonance. Part of the reason as a society some of us step forward and say, please do not do this, is primarily because you're not an isolated piece. You're part of this masterpiece, this tapestry of life. And that one piece, which is your life, connects with another piece, which is another person's life. And if we all individually focused just on our needs and the pursuit of our self-interest alone, to the detriment of what could happen to those in your community, then we have chaos. So what we do say, such as myself, is young men, older men, please stop supporting this behavior. You are responsible as a resource object primarily, and also considering that the person who consumes the content, that is a woman, from a sexual perspective, is a man. So about 80 to 90% of content consumption on OnlyFans, and specifically sexual content, are men. If men stop paying for such content, women will stop producing, and women will reverse back to the traditional roles, despite, and I understand this is perhaps a bias on my part, and a failure of understanding on my part. I don't think women would simply revert back to their traditional roles, no, but it means that we're not supporting or incentivizing terrible behavior. I hold men responsible because we control the resources. And at least you think this is perhaps a position I take towards women alone. Let me also share this with you. I have never had any respect, and I do not have any respect for men who pay for sex. I do not have any respect for men who go to strip clubs and give money to women. I do not have respect for men who participate in sexualized content, who perform sex acts as part of being, you might say, male porn stars. As a society, that was a position most people took. Most people felt, well, there's something deficient in yourself as a man if you have to pay a woman to get her love and affection. But there's something pernicious and worse if you have to pay a woman not to give you her affection and love, but to simply perform in front of you. There's something worse if, and it shows a lack of character, a low character value, a low husband value, a low gentleman's value, a low generally intrinsic value as a man, for you to choose that all the pathways that a man is supposed to be, provider, protector, profess his love, be the priest of the family, that you leave all the 6 P's and choose to be a porn star, a P that we never put in the equation. Most men will lean towards me and say, that is a man of low value, and a man that society and men as a group, we do not look up to such men. We consider them to be the bottom of the barrel. I should say something, I think this is interesting, because I mentioned this in the session I did previously. And in the session I did previously, I alluded to the fact that, and this is important for men, but this is also very important for women. In assessing a man's value, in the West, there's been this shift to provision, 1P. And a man's value is simply assessed by his resources. I disagree completely with that position. I think a man's value is much more than what he can provide. My perspective is a simple one. I still hold on to the 6 P's. The first is purpose. A man has to provide a purpose, a sense of meaning, a vision, a plan, a direction, a goal. That purpose sets out the entire pathway of a man. It determines his philosophy, his principles, it determines his belief system, it determines his morals, then his character, it determines his values, his ethics, his lifestyle. And it aligns with other people in the same community to create a nation of what we call consistent philosophies or ideologies or values. A man's purpose is the most important thing. A man's purpose is intrinsically connected to what I call his manhood value. A man's character is connected to what I call his character value. I consider a man's character value and a man's manhood value, in terms of him understanding his purpose, to be the most important in terms of assessing a man's value. Those two alone will make up about 70% of a man's overall value. The next is the man's intrinsic or economic intrinsic value, his ability to produce or convert, solve problems for other people, create value, and be compensated. Add it to the other two, and it makes up roughly about 75% of a man's value. Then we have other things: a man's gentleman value, his non-sexual marketplace value, his sexual marketplace value, his reproductive fertility value, and more. The point of the conversation is a simple one. If his manhood value, which is his purpose, and his character value, which has to do with his character, his philosophy, his beliefs, his morals, his ethics, and more, if those two are the most important things that we use as a society to assess a man's value, then it means a man who is a porn star, by virtue of the act he carries out or a profession he chooses, he is indicating that he does not have any of the two. Now, he might have wealth and he might have money, but I can assure you, in the presence of other men, across nations, across geography, if all men stood back and said, "What do you do?" and one says, "I work with my hands, I'm a bricklayer," and the other says, "Well, I'm a butcher, I work in a local butcher's shop," and the other says, "Well, I'm an accountant," and the other, "I'm a doctor," I have found something to be true. Even men who were raised to be white-collar professionals have an incredible amount of respect for blue-collar jobs and men who work with their hands, because we understand that those men have a level of character that we men who do not use our hands, we lack. Now, the reason I said this is important to both men and women is that women can understand that even for men who are of a certain socioeconomic level and who are of a certain intellectual education, general understanding, who have good judgment, who have wisdom, who are discerning, money does not serve as the first criteria in judging who a man is. So women who choose OnlyFans as the pathway and they sell out to money, what they are saying is in effect that they are taking, despite being in the peak of their beauty in youth and fertility and chastity and purity, that they're also tossing away all of that in addition to character and purpose, and they're pursuing money. Now, this brings me to the conversation and a reference that I think is one of the most powerful sections. Now, I deviate, and I apologize for this. One of my favorite books is the Bible. One of my favorite books in the book called the Bible is the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 19 says, "Money answers everything." Fascinating section. I won't go through what it says before that. But it's important to understand that everything is bought. My mentor said to me many years ago, he says, everything is bought. The currency of exchange is what varies and differs, but everything is bought. Those who sell themselves in exchange for money are no different from Judas. They are no different from Judas because in effect, you put a value on yourself. Now, if that value is £5 per month, or £5 per session, or £2,000 per minute, or £4,000 per hour, whatever the value is, you've effectively said, that is my intrinsic worth. And I would any day choose a man who says, you cannot buy me because I am more than money. I may not have the money myself. I may not have the resources. But the one thing I have is a good name. Silver and gold have I not, but what I do have is my reputation. Now, women who engage in OnlyFans are simply saying, I have no reputation. I don't care about my reputation. I don't care about what people might think. And therefore, this raises a very, very significant issue, which is hyper-individualism. It doesn't matter what other people think. It's me, and only God can judge me. One of the most pernicious, yet profound developments in the past 20, 30 years. I call this reverse narcissism. It's all about you and you. Now, we go back to the conversation or the statement I made about today's topic. And this is where I bring today's session to a close. I want to read something for you that I think is important and I think will form the sections to follow. And one of my favorite writers, teachers, is someone called Henry David Thoreau. Now he says, now if you build castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put foundations under them. If you build castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put foundations underneath. The point of that, which is served as the inspiration to today's topic, where they should be, is a simple one. The past 2 sessions, today and the previous one, I've said, listen, I don't think women should be doing this. But you built your castles on the air already. And there are women who will go ahead regardless. And my role, therefore, is to say, well, how can I help you structure a foundation under what you built? Certainly, we as a society, we care too much to let those castles remain in the air. I will be providing, as I go forward, things to consider to ensure you have the right foundation based on the pathway you've chosen. Now, if you, for whatever reason, come to your road to Damascus moment, and you choose to hate the things you once loved and love the things you once hated, and that is entirely up to you. My role is simply to provide you with guidelines to serve you should you come to that place, your Garden of Gethsemane, should you come to that place where you simply say, well, take this cup from me, it's too much. You have a road back to love, which is back into society. I'll give you a precursor to what will follow. I said in the sessions as I started the series, OnlyFans is a high reward, very high risk, very low probability of success endeavor. About 1% of the top content creators make more than the 99% combined. I use the reference. The average earnings of the average content creator on OnlyFans is £125 per month. That's £1,500 annually. The top creators earn about £83,000 per month. In the example I used in one of the sessions, I made reference to a young woman, Brit, who makes about £200,000 monthly. So what you see is this skewness in the distribution. It's a high risk, very high reward, but very low probability of success. For those who unfortunately will fall within the average, I will have a strategy for you. For those who fall within the lucky few, I will have a strategy for you in terms of building your foundations under the castles you built. What I tend to find is those who are hyper successful end up becoming no different from Judas combined with lottery winners, because they haven't taken the necessary steps to plan ahead. They don't know what the exit strategy is. They don't begin with the end in mind. You see, all that money comes fast and it goes fast. It's the same. When a person with experience meets a person with money, the person with experience gets the money and the person with money gets the experience. Now, I don't know what side of the equation you want to be on, but the point is, what would it gain you if you gain the whole world by virtue of fame, power, and money, and other people stole? Oh, that's the wrong word. That's the wrong word. All the funds you got in exchange for your soul disappears because you did not have the right foundation for all of what you created. All the sacrifices becomes wasteful. Now, that's one camp. The other camp being those who will never be successful. And the question is simply, if some of you, and many of you, most of you, will fall within the average, then what is the strategy for that? Now, the one strategy I will not recommend is for you to double down. But it's important still to have a strategy. Perhaps you believe in never giving up, or you believe in doing whatever it takes, you still need a strategy. In the sessions to follow, I will provide some ideas, some concepts that you can consider. I think, fundamentally speaking, in the long term, most of us want to be happy. We will never get happiness as a consistent experience. But what we're looking for is, if we cannot be happy, we want to be fulfilled. The question is, what brings fulfillment? Fundamentally, we do not get fulfillment from strangers or being alone. And therefore, relationships matter, which is why at the start of this whole series, I said there are people who are breaking relationships, whether that be with fathers or mothers, siblings, friends, because of this pathway of making money. Perhaps because your values or your new values are very different to what you were raised on, or what your community or your inner circle believe in. And it's important to understand that 80% or more of our happiness will come from our relationships, our loved ones. And it's really, really necessary, therefore, to ensure you don't throw the baby away with the bath water. You need a way back to love. I hope today's session has been useful.